Nathan, thank you very much. I really appreciate the introduction. I have a lot of things I want to say to you, and I don't have like a pause and a rewind button, but I'm counting on the fact that this is being filmed, so if you like this talk, you can listen to it later and then slow me down. So I'm going to go pretty fast. I have a lot of things I want to offer to you. And I'm going to ask you to set aside whatever specific cap you wear during the day that says, I do this kind of design, and put on the big D cap. Put on the, what if I could design the whole world cap, because that's kind of where I'm going. And let's dive in. My thesis here is that we've been designing from mistrust of the average human being for decades, if not a couple centuries. And I'm going to try to explain to you why we've been doing this, but we've been doing it so long that we don't notice it. We've been doing it so long that we've forgotten that we used to be alive together in ways that actually, in many cases, came out of trust. So what I want to do is help you see the landscape, basically identify how to spot design from mistrust, what it means, how to interpret it, and then how to fix it. So I'm heading there, and what's really interesting is I usually prefer to speak early at a conference because then I've said something and then I get to speak to you and you can tell me it was terrible, it was great. Here, it turns out, half the speakers that I've been listening to over the last day and a half are completely feeding wonderfully what I'm about to say. So I'm hoping to tie some of these streams together and make them relevant to you as designers of different kinds. But remember, keep the big D design hat on. The title of this talk is Design from Trust, so that's where I'm heading. To get there, I'm going to take a little tour through one particular discipline and show you the effects of design from mistrust. And the discipline I've chosen is education, kind of because, as you will see in a second, it's a sitting duck. So I'm talking about the compulsory education system, right? Why do we call it compulsory? Why is it called the compulsory education system? Because we can compel you. We can force you to put your children into it. Now, the things that I'm about to say kind of peaked a decade or two ago, and there's some really interesting experimental things going on, and we're loosening up a bit. But really, we're moving out of this peak where we industrialized education. We took the lessons learned from industry, and between the US Civil War and the First World War, the Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford foundations poured more money into the US educational system than any federal, local, or other government agency because they needed good consumers and good factory workers. And so that's what we got. We got a system that does that. What we really did, a little more specifically, is some of our educators went to Germany and they imported the Prussian military school system that was developed for Otto von Bismarck, and we brought that in. And I kind of got to ask you, how's that been? How's that played out for you, right? So what we got is a system that has a whole bunch of, I won't talk about all these because I've got a lot to say, but we wound up with a pretty dysfunctional system, and we're all wrestling with how do we make it better. We have very well-intentioned people buried inside this system, which is designed to give us not just these sort of bad outcomes, like bored students who become sort of indifferent adults, but that gives us something else that I call the modern OCD, which is obedience, compliance, and dependence. The system is designed to do this, and I'm going to go into more detail than this. So what I'd like to do is have you go back and think about your 6th grade classroom, right? Put yourself back in 6th grade for a second, and again, put yourself in more or less a stereotypical compulsory educational classroom, just for my sake, because if you went some other route, bravo to you, but I want to make some points about the general system here. And what I want you to do is read the landscape. What does this classroom experience tell you? What is the hidden architecture here? And there's something called the hidden curriculum of education. And I learned of this kind of by accident, and it's become really important to me. And I'll tell you what it is. I, your teacher, am God in this classroom. Like, what you say doesn't really matter, and I can put a mark on your record that will destroy your career. For years, you'll be trying to erase that. Turn off whenever I tell you to. Stay in class where you belong. You're not really trusted outside. When we say move, though, drop everything and move, right? Because your flow doesn't really matter. Like, if you happen to be really passionately writing a poem, that's okay, we don't really care. You're being watched all the time, especially post-Columbine. Surveillance is everywhere in schools. Others will evaluate you. We're never going to ask your buddies in class, even though they know who the goofball and who the genius is. We're never going to ask them. But you're going to be evaluated through standardized scores, et cetera. And what you do here in school, it's this little petri dish, has no consequence in the real world. So what you're doing has no effects on your real world. You are to surrender your will to a predestined chain of command. If you want to read more about this, read John Taylor Gatto, John Holt, Grace Llewellyn, a bunch of other people. So this is the hidden architecture of school. It's reinforced every hour on the hour by this bell that rings that says, drop what you're doing, move on over there. This is a system we sort of tried out and then rolled over. There were riots in the streets of New York when they rolled out we're going to bounce the kids around from class to class because the parents knew this was going to screw something up. So this hidden architecture has some really interesting effects. It imposes control over everybody, but it cuts us away from each other. You're being graded and taught and tested as an individual in this world, right? Not as a team. We're going to ask you to collaborate later, but in school that's called cheating. But there's another really more interesting effect. I like this one a lot. It cuts away our responsibility for the task at hand. In school, your responsibility is not to be curious and to just go try to solve the world's problems. Your responsibility is show up on time, it's the OCD. Show up on time, absorb whatever we're telling you, regurgitate it on the test, flush the buffers, and move on to the next thing. That's how the system's really designed. So a lot of what's happening here creates scarcity. And you may be wondering, what do you mean scarcity? So let me go deeper still into this notion of scarcity. And I'm going to compare scarcity versus abundance from the compulsory system to maybe something else that's not compulsory. And if you'd like to look at some interesting options, look up unschooling online. It's a very, very interesting concept that freaks everybody out. And I'll compare it in that the second your kid goes to school, we automatically separate them into a grade level. That is, the kids that they were accidentally born next to within about 12 months, right? We do that, when in fact they could learn from anybody. In the old one-room schoolhouse, Susie was teaching Bobby his numbers and blah, 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 and the best way to learn something is to teach it to somebody. We have certified teachers, but you could learn from anybody, so we don't create abundance in teaching. We have vetted books. Just ask me about the Texas School Board sometime and the politics of school textbooks, when in fact any object in the world you could learn from, and there's no reason really to filter. You're going to learn math during math class, but any moment could be a math learning moment. You're going to learn in class plus some homework, when again, you could learn any place in the world as your classroom. And we're going to teach all you kids pretty much the same time, the same way. And now you may be thinking, well, software is going to fix that. We're going to have personalized software that's going to fix things. While I love software and I love the intertubes, as you'll see, I don't think that that's really the solution here. I think that the institution itself is designed in a way to create these problems. So then we're going to evaluate you all through standardized tests and never try to figure out who you are. And we're going to make sure that what you do has no consequences in the real world, because after all, you're just a child. Ask me sometime about stories about children who've done really amazing things in the world in different ways. So why would you do this? Who would design a system like this? And I'm not trying to say that this was designed with these principles in mind explicitly, and they said, oh, great, let's make sure we have scarcity everywhere and so forth. I'm saying this showed up because at some point, we thought we were building this for efficiency and for scale. And damn it, there's 7.2 something billion humans on Earth. A lot of them are in the US. We need to educate them. And there's another argument that we want to do it for fairness, that everybody should sort of get some sort of equal step up into the world. I would tell you rather that what we did was we institutionalized it for efficiency and scale, but really we were afraid of things. We had fear that we don't want these kids to get injured. We don't want them kidnapped. We don't want them this. And there's another kind of fear too, which is we fear we might, and this is just my own point of view, that they might become really round citizens and start questioning the institutions that are around them and start realizing how screwed up they are. This is where I want to put Jake's slide in the middle of this presentation. So what we've done is we've created a system that doesn't trust a whole bunch of things. We don't trust that children are curious, that they'd like to figure out their place in the world, that their families might help them learn, that their communities could help, that kids could and should do serious things in the world, that the resources for all of this are available somehow, that we could evaluate these kids so that someone might hire them, or if they want to go off on their own, that they could make their own way. So let me flip that for a second. So what if, and the only thing I've done here is I've italicized the R. What if children are curious? But what if you believed every statement on this page to be true? What if you thought resources are available, families can help, et cetera, et cetera? This creates a juicy, delicious, chewy set of design questions. This creates a design agenda. It's like, oh my God, if we trusted that these things were true, so we're designing from trust, you get great design questions like, hey, if the kids aren't in school, where are they? Or, how could we reuse the school grounds very differently? How do we help kids find learning cohorts? I think learning is social. There's a couple things you want to learn by yourself, but mostly, wouldn't it be cool if I want to learn Mandarin Chinese, and it doesn't matter if I learn Mandarin Chinese with a 7-year-old and a 70-year-old, especially if we really get along and we help each other learn and we have similar learning styles. How do I discover my learning style? That's sort of barely coming up today. How about dual working couples and the poor? There's all these great design questions. How do I figure out who's trustworthy? These are fabulous things to sink your teeth into that very few people and institutions are working on right now. So this is a summary. Now I'm going to bubble out of education and go more generally. This is a summary that if you build from mistrust, you have to use a lot of coercion. You have to make people do things your way because you're worried about bad actors. So you're trying to neutralize their behavior first. You need to prevent the bad stuff from happening. As opposed to, in a system that's designed from trust, you know that there are bad actors, but you worry about them later. In mistrust, you're designing for efficiency and scale, as I said, and it's very much about individual people and individual performance, so you need a lot of control, as opposed to, let's design the system so that all the stakeholders thrive and so that they can be interdependent in community, all of which may sound a little woo-woo, but it's how we used to stay alive. It's how we used to live. What's happened is we've consumerized every sector of society and life. Not just business sectors, not just consumer packaged goods like toothpaste and soap, but culture. Remember culture? We used to sing with each other and tell stories. Now it's like, do you want the Nintendo or are we going to go see the new movie? We've consumerized every sector, and just to illustrate it, I'm going to first talk a little bit about what do I mean by consumerize, because I should be more specific. And I mean to include things like we industrialized, we standardized, we automated, and we then commoditized a whole bunch of stuff. But this is all behind the curtain. This is how the sausage is made. And it turned out, this system turns out a lot of abundant, inexpensive things. But then I'm interested in what happens behind, sort of in front of that curtain. And everything is being sold to us like Cheerios and Cocoa Puffs. Everything uses this technology to say, do you want this or that? And our duty as good consumers is to pick from what's on offer, on billboards, on signs, on personalized everything. So do you want the Romney or the Obama? Now, I don't really think this is democracy, and I think we had a couple of great talks about what democracy might be like if we trusted people. Do you want the Harvard or the Stanford, or are you going to shoot for something else? This is education, right? Do you drive a Mercedes or a Ford? Are you a Yankees fan or a Giants fan? Sorry, Yankees, maybe next year. I don't know. Are you a girl or are you a boy? Right? Just walk down the toy aisle in the store and you'll see the consumerization of childhood right there front and center. Do you do couture or do you do fast fashion? Are you a Beatles person or a Stones fan? And what may be more relevant to this crowd, Apple, Android, something else, I don't know. So again, here's the list I just showed you. Look at it now through new eyes, thinking about each of these different sectors of the economy and of life. And don't think about them only in that, oh gosh, everybody's advertising to us. But here's the other slide I showed before that. Oh, each of these sectors has been designed mostly from mistrust. Somehow, weirdly, we lost faith in humans a long time ago. And how we lost that faith is a really nice dinner conversation over a good bottle of wine. But we did, right? So what I'm asking you to do is to look for the hidden architecture of intent. What do I mean by architecture? Well, architecture can be the built environment where we pour concrete. It can also be the laws and regulations around it. It can also be norms and culture. And sometimes norms and culture are stronger than all of the above. It's shocking. It's just amazing. So if you let me wax melodic for a moment, in some sense, architecture, seen really broadly like this, is destiny. We assume this is how you educate children, if I just take the education example. And when you try to do something different, all sorts of people frown and tell you you're ruining their lives. It's really interesting. The reinforcement mechanisms are strong. Design creates architecture. That's how architectures are done. And I don't mean here just the draftsmen designing the school grounds. I mean also who designed how the school is organized, who gets rewarded, how we get measured, all those kinds of things. And intent informs design. And you probably intuited that one. Now, if you're doing the math here, intent is destiny in some sense, and design is right there in the middle everywhere. So before I go into my home stretch and try to tell you a little bit about what this design from trust thing is, one of my favorite quotes in the world from Mark Twain, favorite quotes in the world, period, happens to be from Mark Twain. What gets us into trouble is not what we don't know. It's what we know for sure, but just ain't so. So I'd like you to question when you walk around and look how things are built. And I'm going to give you a couple examples more of what that's like as I explain this notion of design from trust. Now, it's not designed for trust. I'm not trying to build a system you might really trust and use better encryption, full identity. I'm designing from trust, from an assumption of trust, from a basis of trust. Because what I want is to build relationship, to create a moment where we might actually come together. I also don't mean naive trust. If you're designing from trust, you know that there are bad actors. You totally get this. There are bad actors. But what you're looking for is these gestures of trust, these little moments of risk that happen that allow us to come into community, that allow us to help each other. And what consumerization did is it buffed all the sharp edges off everything, kind of, created standard offers, and cut away all of those moments of risk. And when we see a moment of risk, we start passing laws. We start pouring concrete. We start trying to fix it so that that moment of risk won't happen again. But in fact, it's those moments of risk that are what society comes out of and what community comes out of and all those things we then want, right? We want those things. So design from trust sounds sometimes very itchy and counterintuitive and uncomfortable. It can be more effective and less expensive than the other way of trying to control and coerce and measure and all these kinds of things. If you're purely industrial about it, you wind up getting security problems. You get motivation problems. We have students who are disengaged. We have citizens who don't vote. We have people who just don't care. We have high suicide rates, all kinds of bad things. And I blame them on this system that we live inside of that doesn't let us be humans and sort of reach out and connect with each other, really. We've been isolated so that we'll buy more stuff. So unfortunately, this design from trust is kind of social, so it doesn't always just jump into being the way you can buy an ad campaign and suddenly lots of people see your ad. And it's also nested inside other problems. So the school system is nested inside of, the employment system is nested inside of something else, and trust me, they're all screwed up in pretty deep ways. If you build from trust, you'd build a very different system. A couple examples. The Wikipedia was not originally called the Wikipedia. The original project was called the Newpedia. Jimmy Wales hired Larry Sanger, and then they contracted with 80 experts in different fields, and they said, hey, you're our experts. We would like to create a free encyclopedia for the world. Here is a 7-layer editorial process, so please submit your works and we'll edit them and then publish them. And in 18 months, they had published 20 articles. 18 months, 20 articles, almost nothing. And they looked at each other and said, this is not really working. And in the meantime, somebody had explained to them what a wiki was. Wikis were brand new right then. And so they said, we don't want to insult you guys, but we've put a wiki over here. Come on over and try it, and the rest is history, right? Because there's this gesture of trust at the top of pretty much every page on Wikipedia that says, hey, edit this page. And it says, come on in. We know you can vandalize Wikipedia, and trust me, nobody knows vandals like Wikipedia. But we think we can sort of figure out how to do this dance with you. And Wikipedia is so big that it gets complicated, and there's lots of other good stories off it. So another example. Who in here has been to an open space or an unconference or a bar camp? Raise your hand if you've done any of these. Anything like that? All right, the design field is not doing enough of these sort of very self-organizing events. What these are is events that trust that the people coming to the event have in their heads and in their genius what this group ought to be doing together. And these provide different kinds of methodologies to get that in the air and to split people up into conversations they want to have, not highly structured events with, now we're going to have the fifth of 50 panelists. This is a little town in England called Poynton. This is the before picture, and this is the after picture. They did something called traffic calming. And traffic calming was pioneered partly in the Netherlands by a guy named Hans Monderman, who I was very lucky to meet. What they did was they redesigned the city by taking away all the architecture of traffic control that we know is supposed to be there, like stoplights and limit lines and high pedestrian sidewalks. There's a drop from the sidewalk to the street because those are pedestrians and I'm a driver. So they've swapped all that out, softened it all up, and what they got back was not only lower accident rates and the same throughput, because this becomes arterial traffic instead of half the people just stopping waiting, but they got their city back. They got foot traffic. So if you want to see more about all these different examples, go to jerrysbrain.com. I publish my brain online, which is going to sound really weird. In my brain, look for this thought. It's called Contrarians Who Make or Made Sense. There's Hans Monderman. There's Harrison Owen, who invented open space. These are all people from all these different paths of life who discovered these interesting ways of being in the world. And I don't have time to tell you about them because I'm almost out of time. So I'm asking you to decide, do you think people really are initially good or bad? Are they generally good or bad? And I'm working from quotes like this one. I was at South by Southwest 8, 9 years ago, where Jimmy Wales interviewed Craig Newmark, the guy who started Wikipedia and the one who started Craigslist. And both of them during that hour roughly said, you know what? People are generally more trustworthy than we think they are. When you design from trust, you can differentiate yourself from everybody else. Because right now, I can get free services for a lot of stuff. So price is not a differentiator. I think trust is the new differentiator. Designing from trust is also cheaper than designing with control. Designing from trust blows the ceiling off. This is a little bit cryptic, but what I mean is, when I've made sure that nobody makes noise right now and that everybody's within 12 months of each other, and that when I've basically locked things down and controlled them, I've taken away this opportunity for you to come together in interesting new ways and do things that I haven't thought about. So you want to blow the ceiling off and really allow innovation to happen. Trust people more in different ways. Finally, I think trust is the way out. I think if we design from trust, which I see as an extension of or a superset around design thinking, and I know this group is really literate in design thinking and huge fans of it, and I love it for its empathy. But to me, design thinking still drops you into local minima. I could ask you to redesign the school bell, and you might replace it with Beethoven, but I haven't seen enough design thinking where it says, oh, you know what? The bell is actually the major problem here, and it's part of a series of problems, and let's try to tackle that, because all too often your design assignments are too small. So ask for a bigger design assignment. But trust is the way out, and I will leave you with a question that's been on my mind for the last 5 years. It's kind of my guiding question, which is, what if we trusted you? Thank you very much. Do you want this seat?
No, that's fine.
Okay, good.
I do have to let you know that David Hasselhoff's people called.
Yeah.
They'll be waiting for you after break.
With the car? With Kit?
If only, right?
I mean, I did that whole thing so I could get a ride in Kit.
Exactly. Well, it's funny. We should have if I ever had a car collection, it would be like Kit next to the Back to the Future DeLorean.
Oh, yeah.
Tweet your questions, please. Although I just have so many things I want to talk to you as well about. Okay, starting off. Your examples, Adam's examples, a whole bunch of other people's examples. It makes me think that a lot of what's happening isn't really new. It's getting back to the way things were.
It's a Back to the Future kind of thing.
Right, exactly. So why is that? How did we get so far astray from things we obviously want?
Yeah.
And how do we get back?
My shortcut for this is that somewhere around the Industrial Revolution, or give or take, the left brain won, managerial, scientific, Cartesian, rational, paternalistic, hierarchical man won, and I say man.
White man.
And it won in a scorched earth strategy.
Yep.
The feminine, the emotional, meaning, purpose, all those things were shoved aside and pounded hard and suppressed at every turn. And what's happening right now is the fingers are out of the dike, and all of this other energy, which I call sort of yin energy, because I borrow yin and yang a little bit to explain this, is pouring back into the space. And our job now is to integrate them, because you don't want a world without decision making based on facts. That's cool too. But you don't want a world run only by decision making based on facts.
Well, so I'm going to advance a suggestion that it is all due to the Chicago School of Economics.
They're heavy contributors.
Because that's
look
where
look in my brain
right,
into the Chicago School.
This idea of if you can't be measured, it's not important after all, so let's ignore it all. Really,
well, that partly comes out of scientific method, which is a little bit guilty as well.
Please, if any of you ever invent a time travel machine, I know there's lots of things to go visit in the past. Please go back to the 20s and 30s and kill the Chicago School of Economics.
You're not allowed to put a hit out on the stage here.
No, I'm not talking about the people.
Oh.
Just kill the idea.
That's
don't
better.
let it.
Yeah, don't let the idea live.
Because
that's good. I'm with you now.
We would have better things to talk about now. Okay. You talk a lot about trust as a design principle, and you've actually started a design firm based on trust.
I haven't really started a design firm. I'm looking for a design firm that would like to do this. So y'all have a design firm that thinks this is a good idea? Come talk to me. What I run is a think and do tank that uses this as its thesis. And each of us comes from a different discipline. So one person is, in fact, from packaged goods retail. And one person is from healthcare. And one person is from other, consulting and so forth. And we're all looking at this going, how does this change my industry? How does it change my job? How does it change what I should tell my children to go do?
Great question just came in via Twitter. If people are good, is it groups that are evil? Does Wikipedia work because it touched people, not groups?
Good question, complicated answers. There's a book out there called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. There's a whole bunch of fear of the mob, basically. And it turns out that people are generally, this is just my opinion, more cooperative than we think they are. I read a little bit of Peter Kropotkin at one point, and he's like one of the anarchists, and we should be very afraid of the anarchists because they promote anarchy. And his book starts with all these lovely stories about how animals cooperate in nature, and then he goes on to describe how humans cooperate. He's just trying to say that, hey, you know what? We're kind of cooperative critters. When we're set against each other around scarce resources or whatever, then we screw it up. So regenerative capitalism, right? A moment ago, we were talking about regenerative capitalism. It's a fabulous idea. If you read Michael Pollan's book and read about Joel Salatin, the farmer at Polyface Farms, and how he grows grass, and it's better after every cycle of growing cows and chickens on it, that's regenerative capitalism. Why did we turn Arkansas into just pigs and chickens? Why did we turn Iowa into just corn? What happened to us?
And sorghum.
Corn and sorghum. And soy is actually like the biggest crop in the US.
It's true.
We did that because we industrialized everything. And we thought that that was a better way to feed the world. We really did.
Chicago School of Economics?
We really thought that was a good idea. And these big ideas, again, these big ideas eat the world. When, Maynard Keynes, people who don't think they're serfs to these big ideas, they're totally slaves to these concepts.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Really quickly, why is the relationship economy a misnomer and not a thing?
So relationship economy is intentionally in tension. That was kind of weird, but I like it. Meaning that you don't buy and sell authentic relationships in an economy. But we think everything is in an economy. Before, I was really pleased about the quote of Karl Polanyi and The Great Transformation earlier. I loved that book, one of my favorite books. Before the Industrial Revolution, everything didn't have a price. Like, yeah, there were coins, and read David Graeber, read a bunch of people, but we have come into, we've forgotten how to actually be in a relationship, and we jones for it. We are so thirsty for authentic relationships that then what we do is we create engagement campaigns, and we try to offer rewards, and we do gamification, and you know what? If you got under the hood and worked with the roots of the problem, a lot of this other stuff would kind of solve itself.
Yeah, the gamification thing, every time one of my students mentions that word, I just bristle because gamification is just sort of modern day, oh, everyone's just a lab rat. It's just the sort of concession that, okay, at our basis nature, we're just lab rats.
Do I get 10 points for completing the talk?
Yeah, you do.
Sweet.
Exactly. You're pressed here for more. That you brought up authenticity, and I know you've coined this great word called faux-authenticity because
I borrowed it. It's been in circulation.
Well, in my head, you created it, and that's good enough for me. But could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So there's a book by Pine and Gilmore who wrote about the attention economy. They wrote authenticity, right? They're talking about the perception of authenticity, which people like me call faux-authenticity. We actually want to be authentic. And vulnerability, if you have 20 minutes, go watch Brené Brown's TEDx talk called The Power of Vulnerability. The path to authentic connection is through vulnerability.
Watch both of them. They're both worth it.
But start with the TEDx one, then do the TED one.
Right, exactly, right.
It's better. And read her book, Daring Greatly, if you love the talks. Because Daring Greatly is full of much more motherload of great
buy multiple copies, sorry for the hoarding thing, or borrow multiple copies and give them away
to everybody.
Christmas presents at the very least.
Daring Greatly.
Yeah.
Which just totally sounded like a merchandising announcement.
I know, it did.
Still.
But we're
recommending an idea, what we really like.
So back to authenticity.
Authenticity.
How does it show up in corporate America?
It shows up everywhere because most corporations are hiding something in the closet that they really can't talk about or don't want to talk about. And so what they do is a friend of mine, I guess it was David Ogilvy or somebody said, if you have nothing to say, sing it. Right? And so that's kind of what we're doing, and it's hard.
Which would seem like a slide against Broadway in the heart of Broadway, but it's not.
You know what? I'm going to sneak my way out of the building later.
Well, you have to miss the David Hasselhoff folks already. So
exactly.
Right? Exactly. So last question. You talked about here's all these sectors. Let's look at these sectors again, but from this lens of trust. Mm-hmm. Can you give us an idea of what does that look like, or what does that feel like even in one of those sectors?
Great question. So there are examples of this at work everywhere around the world. All of the open source, open hardware, open anything, open biology, open astronomy, anything that sort of says open and actually is open, because there's some people co-opting the open label who aren't open, but anything that actually is open is dealing with trust. Like, we don't own the assets, we're sharing the assets, we're building the commons, all that kind of stuff. It's everywhere. And then there's a series of other movements from unschooling to micro-lending to, micro-lending is giving loans to people with zero collateral. They got nothing. and you're trusting that they might lend it back. And the first ones were trust circles, back to this notion about is it groups or not, right? Which I didn't quite get back to answering because it's so complicated. So I think I'm not trying to say if only everybody thought like me, everything would be great. I'm trying to say I'm seeing a lot of evidence of a huge change. This trust and relationship thing, I think, is the metric, the through thread. And if that's an easy way to remember it and then to see it, which is why I was trying to say pay attention to the architectures of intent, then you can see clear to building better systems, designing better stuff.
I will say that if only more of us thought a little bit more like this, I think we might be a little bit more happy and satisfied. So with that, please thank Jerry.
Thank you. Thanks.